We are beginning to record. So go ahead and introduce yourself, Raafat.
So I'm Raafat Zaini. I graduated with my PhD from WPI in Organization Behavior and System Dynamics. I'm currently a research scientist at the Social Science and Policy Studies. I'm working on simulation modeling of learning and cognition theory. My area of interest is in organizational dissent dynamics, change, and strategy with focus on higher education institutions. I co-founded with Saeed the peer mentoring group, the CLM, and I served as the president of the WPI System Dynamics Club at some point. And I'm serving also as the assistant vice president of marketing and communication at System Dynamics Society. Thank you. So, Tim, you said you want to talk about the club at the beginning, or shall I just go?
Let's just jump in.
Okay. So my talk today that I've done a couple of times before, and I changed every time I change the title because I'm in pursuit of equilibrium. And these are personal reflections from my PhD journey. At the beginning, I always put the disclaimer that whatever I'm saying is my own experience. Over time, communicating this to people, I found interest and I find some anecdotal evidence. And yeah, which encouraged me to continue giving this talk. And thank you, Tim and Christine, for inviting me to give it today too. So I'll tell my story, and then we'll talk briefly about the journey dynamics, and then the end part, because we are in the back to school series at this CLM. I'll give some tips that will hopefully be useful for those who are still in that journey. Okay. So for those who have seen me before presenting, they have seen the slides maybe 10 times, 20 times. And I always put it at the beginning whenever I present something about my work during my PhD journey. And this was my start. I'm starting here far in the left. This is when I came in July 2011, thinking about, I want to do innovation sustainability in R&D organization. And then over time, I looked at during my qualifier, which I did a couple of months later in May 2012, I introduced the topic of the structure of the dynastic cycle as a professional competence model. And at some point, I was also interested in the R&D organizations from the project dynamics point of view. Then came up also the project that I work here at WPI on. I'm not going to go over this now completely. The merit of this is that from the beginning, I was going in different directions, and directions evolved. And at some point, things cross paths with each other. So this map is rather confusing. So guess what's happening to me doing it? But I kept doing it. The takeaway that I took from this map is that I was open to the flow. And, things were evolving and going. So some of them were dead end, never moved forward. And some of them moved forward to go places. And yeah, so that's something that I learned from this map. But this map, as I was cleaning it up, and we system dynamicists look for patterns, I kind of started seeing a pattern that was evolving from this journey, which I will show in this polished slide. And with polishing, this means I was extracting the data and removing what is not needed, putting them on the time scale so I can see if there is something that will emerge from that. So I put the years down below, and when I thought about the y-axis, I did not know what to do. The only thing that came to me is that, looking from the previous slide, is that I was diverging. I started at one point, knowing exactly what I want to do, I think from the first meeting with Professor Saeed, I told him, this is what I want to do. And he said, yeah, okay. If you will take a look at your classes now. And I said, okay, yeah, but when can we meet again? I said, okay, if you start your classes, we can meet again. And then I disappeared. I don't know how many months then, because I was busy doing my classes. And I came to system dynamics not knowing anything about system dynamics except that I want to do it. And at the same time, I also I know organization behavior from being in the industry for many years, but I also don't know what does that mean when it comes to academia. So I thought, you know what, maybe it's a good idea to focus. Of course, doing classes, you get to do projects. And that's one thing that WPI does best too, is getting you sometimes to do big project in a class, or maybe tons of homework that will just leave you no time to think about dreams too. But when you do a project, you kind of venture around and see things around. And I'm lucky being around on campus. I did a project for strategies of universities growth, and nothing was in my mind about universities at that time. Mike can attest to that, because I kept asking so many questions about how a university is being run, and I have to finish that project, and I haven't done enough reading. Then I also did my qualifier, as I said before. So I'm putting things around the time scale, which somewhere are in the ballpark of the 2012. And I started seeing a topic, because you do some reading for the qualifier and you write a paper, the topic of dissent on organizations. And I thought, you know what, this is something that is interesting to me, but I don't know what to do with it. At the same time, part of the project I did with WPI, somebody read my work that I shared on one of the system dynamics colloquiums, not even the conference yet. And I was contacted by a group of researchers who wanted me to do some strategy modeling for a university. So I thought, you know what, this is a path, maybe, but I did not want to do anything with the universities in terms of just that area of modeling, because I want to do organizational behavior. So in one conversation I had with my advisor, he said, yeah, do you think a higher education institution would do as an R&D? And I started exploring that. Yeah, I know. Yes, R&D is actually created there. So people are consuming it and starting the second phase of it, but it's built in universities in addition to teaching. So I thought, you know what, these two would culminate into providing the context for the organization I want to do. But what to do in universities other than looking about growth or meeting targets or publishing research? And I at that time reading about what the change in higher education and what's happening in faculty governance and the voice of faculty and shared governance, and I said, you know what, this is maybe something that applies. And I start digging in there, and over time I started seeing that people are looking at more of a mechanistic view to the organization, more of the tangible things that can be measured. But dissent and communication, and these are all soft variables, latent structures that are hidden and nobody's looking at them, and focusing on performance is just on that particular part. And here, the point at which these two streams converged, if you will, because during this time, I had so much anxiety and feel of loss. Despite that I was doing work, I was presenting. If you see here, these numbers mean this is a publication. This is my first publication, my second publication, my third publication. I presented this 4 times. This is 2 times, 3 times, not to mention CLMs, etc.
So Raafat, just on that, when you say publication, you mean in an academic journal, not just a conference, or are you including conferences?
It includes both, but I actually put publications when they were published in journals.
Right. And then times presented do not include the CLM, but this is more formal presentations?
Yes, yes, more formal, like colloquiums, conferences, competitions that were run at WPI. Every year, WPI runs the graduate learning exchange. Graduate
Great.
I forgot the name of it, but they run it every year. So I participated every year, I think for 2 or 3 years, I think. So this, over the year, I present CLMs, I present competitions, I present at the colloquiums, and I present at the conference, whether it's a poster. Presenting doesn't mean like in a session. It can be also a poster, which sometimes are very useful. Not sometimes, especially for students, I found them more useful than the other format, but you know, it really depends on the topic. So looking at this, I did not pay attention to it that much at the time, but I can recall, let me, before I jump into this, just because when I started at the beginning, I was looking for an area, but then this area changed. It did not change that much. I want to use system dynamics in organizations. Maybe it's fine-tuned a bit to become organizational design. Then my focus developed over time, that I'm looking at both the tangible and the intangible parts. And then I know also the domain. That will be academic institutions or startup universities. And then my purpose was to build the generic structure of university design. Of course, this diagram and this, go ahead, any question? Anybody said something? Oh. I just heard some, like a noise. If I would have reached to that position early on, it was very hard to reach. But capturing that moment was a big moment to me. And this moment was not just suddenly appeared. It was the continuation of doing this thing over and over again. And with coaching and help from committee and feedback from conferences, you know, you need to focus. I didn't know what focus meant. Am I not focused? But I start to grapple with these concepts until I was able to articulate what my area is. So going back to this diagram, it was the night before my proposal defense. And I said, you know, if I put this slide, somebody from the system dynamics would tell me, you know what, I'm seeing a pattern here. What does that mean? Does this mean anything to you? Why did you draw it from the beginning? Especially in system dynamics, we don't believe in diagrams that are just superficial or just showing something. Does it show any behavior that you are interested, you want to talk about? I thought about it as, you know, a reference mode, which is a behavior over time for that journey. And the variable is divergence. That started when I thought I'm focused, and it kept increasing, and over time it started to decrease. Where this is coming from, it's coming from my classes, the projects, the presentations, the books and papers. All this is subsumed in this, the output, the publications that I did that slowly put that path into convergence again. That's my hypothesis. I'm sharing here some of the sketches that I did that early morning after, during showering and thinking about, you know, I need to have a conceptual part for it. I can't just describe it without giving it a meaning. So I put this small dynamic hypothesis, thinking, you know what, this is how I actually evolved. I started taking classes, and I thought about this as the exploration part. And, you know, it's kind of hard to know whether the divergence came up first or the exploration, but I think the moment Professor Said said, you know, just go, and do your work, that was setting me on the path of divergence. So the more I explored, I actually started diverging more, because I'm looking to so many cool things or so many potential things to do. And I felt, as you have seen in that diagram, that I'm just going away from what I wanted to do. And as I'm learning, I started to see, these, for example, organization behavior. I started looking at communication. I looked at dissent. I thought this was helping me sharpen my focus on what I want to do in the organization. Is this a part that I'm interested in or something else? So I thought that building that subject matter expertise was balancing this divergence and try to decrease it. And something else that I attribute much of what I've done is sharing this work. Because with sharing, I'm kind of learn about things that I need to do, things I don't need to do, how to improve the work that I have done. And with this, I felt I'm feeling good about it, that I'm saying and I have data for it, whether how many times I shared, how much ideas I got. I kept a journal with me that for each meeting or for each presentation, I put what I started with and what I ended up with. And I translate this into that fuzzy slide that I kept using, and I share it also with my committee members. So maybe that they can tell me, Raafat, what are you doing? And maybe at some point they have seen that, what, I'm not going anywhere. That, a comment or so, which I don't recall exactly now, that put me back on track. But these are the competing dynamics that I have seen. And I built a small model for it, and I ran a couple of simulations that are not now worthy of showing. But I think my colleague, Saeed, have seen it at some point, and he said, Raafat, maybe this is we can be up to something. This could be a paper. I'm like, what? I just thought these are just my thoughts. He could relate to it. And he said, what, let's work on it and maybe write a paper. And guess what? This is what's happening. So that's why in a couple of weeks, we will unleash the model and, discuss its formulation and talk about how did we improve it. And maybe that's a hardcore system dynamics talk, which I think would be more appropriate at that particular time. And I consulted with Saeed, and he gave me the green light that, okay, this is, let's do this together. So with this, after that, I thought, what?
We have a question from Kareem. Are you open to taking questions, Raafat?
Yes, I'm open.
Kareem, go ahead.
Raafat, can you explain the sharing to divergence connection and the learning to divergence connection? Because the way I look at it, I don't see those. So can you explain that to me?
So when I share, when I present, I get feedback. And this feedback helped me narrow my area or focus. So for example, when I looked at universities, I get a feedback, what kind of universities you're looking at? Are you looking to pure research universities? Or you're looking to public universities? Or you're looking to what kind of universities? So this gave me, okay, you know what? And that's why you saw in that triangle, I put research universities and I put startup universities. So that's, instead of looking just at universities, I was trying to focus. And that's anything that would help me create that inverted triangle or pyramid or what. I thought this is narrowing the focus.
I have a comment, if that's okay. Raafat, do you think that this particular connection from sharing to reducing divergence,
yes, divergence,
has some contingencies? It could create it could
yes,
use divergence too. What is
yes.
that contingency?
Okay, Saeed, I think we have to break it. So when we looked at the modeling, at the model with carefully, we have seen that sharing, it really depends when do you start sharing. So if sharing before building subject matter expertise, it could probably take you into a divergence path because you don't know the area, you haven't explored it, and then maybe any comment will just take you in a different direction. So we thought the accumulation of learning would somehow, there's a feedback to it, that would make the sharing link to divergence would be more meaningful, if you will. So not all sharing would create divergence, or will decrease divergence.
Can I comment on this?
Yeah, sure, Saeed, please do.
So first of all, I will present the technical details of this model early, I think in early October. But to capture what Professor Saeed is mentioning, I think we created two different effects of sharing, and we called the negative, we call the positive impact of sharing on the divergence immature effective feedback. So it means that, I mean, as Raafat explained, if you are in the earliest stages and your subject matter knowledge, depth of your subject matter knowledge is shallow or is low, then sharing will be dangerous. So it will diverge you further if you share your ideas. But as you gain knowledge over time, then the effect of sharing will be, you know, converted to a kind of positive impact on convergence, which means negative impact on divergence. So if that explains the details.
Yeah,
so we have two different effects of sharing in the model.
What I was referring to is that, you know, that's one contingency that you have explained. I was thinking there might be many types of contingencies.
Yes.
One would be who you shared it with. If you just shared it with a random group, you could diverge easily too. So maybe you want to think a little more about the contingencies under which this divergence is reduced and mention those, because it's not a universal connection, so to speak. It's contingent connection.
Yeah, I mean, if I think of examples, I like the examples you gave, Raafat, where you're sharing with presumably your advisors. But if I go to a conference and I share even mature work, they're going to say, well, did you think about this? Did you look at this? Did you hear about this kind of work that's related to this? And I'm going off into other directions at that point, and I'm diverging. Also, if I share within a group of people that I'm working with, I don't care how mature it is, they're working on different things and they'll have different ideas that might drag me in different directions. And I have the same feeling about learning, by the way. So I'm not sure about that connection.
Actually, one of the, thank you, Kareem, for that comment. I actually, when I started, I was looking in the literature. I found who is who, for example, in universities. And in the conference, I made sure that I talked to those who are doing research in universities. So that's probably, again, the contingency that Professor Saeed alluded to, which is who you talk to. So that provided me convergence, because that was the point whether what kind of universities I'm looking at, these questions that I need to be ready for. And this got me on a reading path that helped me sharpen my, my focus. So it's probably that some homework was done, especially in conferences, that was very helpful. But that's at least what we thought about, is that there could be a divergence, and quality of or those who talk to, or the setting where you share your work could probably play a role in that. Maybe we can write about that also in the paper.
Well, on your path, you do your sharing and you have your learning, which can be quite diverse, and perhaps it's very difficult to control it. And then there is this task of picking those pieces which help you converge and ignore those pieces which take you towards divergence. Maybe you want to think about that and sort of substantiate those links more, I guess, carefully based on what is it exactly that happened that caused reduction in divergence.
Actually, thank you, because this is exactly what I'm heading in the next slides. The model now is very abstract. It doesn't really show what I did, because there are things that a student, I mean, if looking at this model, this won't help him much compared to there are things you need to do or I've done that I attribute to maybe I was able to using the whatever is around me during that journey to give substance to this.
I think as you're going through that reduction of abstraction too, you might want to look at very clearly defining what you mean by divergence, because if there's two activities that are sort of overlay each other, we call one divergence of outcomes, your products that you're producing, those sort of big milestones versus, say, exposure to ideas. My experience was very similar to yours. I'd go to conference, I'd get exposed to tons of ideas, like the winter camp. I got 30 ideas, but it was the one idea by Jessica Turnley on legitimacy and coercion and looking at that radically converged me, so it's sort of like, yes, there was a lot of exposure to ideas. Yes, there was a lot of follow-up exploration, but ultimately from that conference came a rapid or sort of radical convergence. So the question is, at what time, how far after, what does the divergence look like? Is it just the number of ideas you got floating around in your head or what you actually produce? Maybe something to look at.
Actually, you're bringing a good point because, and I may use the example and you can talk about it more. So how did you start, Tim? When you came at WPI, what was your topic that you want to do? And what are you doing right now?
It was very different. So there was a divergence at first of major topics, and then a settling on a domain topic, and then converging more and more on that. It looks very similar to your journey, perhaps with more divergence up front, because I even skipped across side projects that I knew would not necessarily produce a PhD, but I did them for business purposes.
One of the things that got me thinking about you especially is that this part in learnings, building the subject matter, I think you came ready with this. This is what I witnessed, that you know your area in terms of the subject. Mm-hmm. But despite this, you were going in a different track. However, you changed back to the track where you had good subject matter expertise.
If I were to use your original construct, my research area started in violence and instability, but the focus was something called memetics. I abandoned that, went to a couple other things, even left violence, and then came back to violence with different focus areas. So I like that construct you had earlier of those layers that you can swap, you can keep in one layer, but swap out elements. But I'd be interested, what was the slide you were going to go to?
Yes. So my slide is the tips, because this would put maybe, context to what we have seen. And that's the first part, which is building the subject matter knowledge. I mean, some people come to the program knowing their area. Maybe Saeed, I think he knows more about economics. I don't think he done economics during the program. Maybe you, Tim. But I came like starting from zero. So I know what does that mean. And I have the feeling for it. And for people who are in the same situation like myself, I think the beginning focus on that particular part. And not all classes are useful for everyone. Maybe you find a class that people talk about and they did not find it very interesting. But for me, one of the classes that was not ending up a very good class in terms of its academic or the pace at which it was going, but I came up with it with my first project that ended up as a publication. Maybe because of the focus, I was focusing on the topic rather than on the noise that is going in the class. And since I was doing that area, and I was thinking maybe it could evolve into something at some point. You can make use of these classes. And I found something very useful is introducing self to the professors, that they know you are doing research or something. And that also helps in curating the content for you, in terms of if everybody has to do a certain project, you can do maybe something that can be a paper, and you can collaborate with the professor who's teaching this class.
As a quick pause, Raafat, Professor Said, you had a comment?
Yes, I would refer you to what Said said, that starting sharing at a certain point in time. But I think the time is a bucket of ignorance. Time reference is not relevant. You want to transform that into a state reference. At that point in time, you are in a state where sharing can help you converge. How do you define that state? Maybe you want to think about that.
I think, Professor Saeed, the reply to this would be really better if we do the modeling part, because we did not do it with time. It was a state. But I'd rather prefer to, if you don't mind, that we do that when we talk about the model later, we can demonstrate this in a better way.
For those who are not aware, there is a second half of this that Saeed will be presenting, which is the actual simulation model, looking at the levels, the stocks, the flows, the equations. So that will be in October.
So for those who are not system dynamicists as well, we're trying to make this that you can relate to it, and maybe useful if you're starting your journey. Taking classes helps in identifying or avoiding research committee members. I think it is a good tool, taking classes, and see whether if you're doing a research project, you can find that. And assignments and projects are really good to explore the area. And professors are happy to support, because at the very end, you have to finish by the end of the semester. They can't let you linger around with unfinished work. So this is a kind of a very good constraint that I found, that having that deadline to finish something, even if it's truncated, but it's finished, one can help improve it further. But I found classes are very helpful in that regard. And then, places like competitions, colloquiums, conferences, and publications, you can use class material to go to these venues. And I think we have many examples around here, probably in the room as well, from class projects that went into becoming publications. I did, Tim did. I don't recall Saeed, but you came with tons of work before. So in terms of research, leading the process, whether it's committee formulation, plan of study, this is an active work a student is doing. It's not supposed that somebody else will decide about this. It's the role of the student to do that. And I think it helps a lot in terms of call for meetings and not to overdo it, because too many committee meetings, I think, could result in divergence too. Or because sometimes, and I have done this, not at least an idea that I've thought about it for maybe even more than 2 days, calling for a meeting can end up in unpleasant outcomes that you think you know nothing, and you really think I'm going back to square one. So I think meeting frequency is something to watch for. Setting milestones, that's important. However, they are light enough to be moved. Because sometimes setting a milestone for a proposal while working on a publication might outweigh this, because going through the publication, there is also learning in that area, and it boosts motivation, and it gives other things like external validation for the work. that could help you or help with the going through the motions of proposal, etc. One-on-one consultations, the committee, you don't need to meet them together. You can meet them separately and have different conversations. Some of them are expert in the tool. Some of them are expert in the subject matter area, and they have different and interesting insights that you can combine and make use make use of. That's my experience. Logging events like meetings, conversations, correspondence, they stay alive. And over time, I came to them and I found some ideas that I've overlooked and that I took back. Because there is an emotional part going through these meetings and they're receiving that feedback that needs to settle down and come back after a few days and look at what you wrote, maybe extract something. Memory doesn't really help, and quick notes and acting on them immediately doesn't really help too. And that's what I did with the reflective journaling. What worked, what didn't, successes and setbacks, even feelings. Because sometimes things that I have overlooked, maybe because it was in an emotional state that did not help me make a good decision. But reflecting on that over time was really helpful. And this is just a picture of my PhD committee meeting #1. Going with the flow, as I said, probably in slide 1, there is change. And sometimes, especially if someone knows their subject very well, it might be hard to accept comments that may be asking to change direction or twist a little bit. And it's not about losing. If and believe in an idea and you explore something different for some time, that's probably strengthening the conviction that this is what I want to do. This is what I think can be done. This is an area which is interesting and you can defend it better. So there are some setbacks, or it feels like a setback, but it actually strengthens the momentum. And of course, embracing time delays, and I'm still suffering from this. Comments sometimes need to be, not sometimes, I think always, need to be absorbed rather than bouncing the answer. And I've had this many times with Professor Saeed, that I don't need you to answer me right now.
I'm just going to jump in here and say guilty as well, where I have learned one of my key learnings from Professor Saeed is just because he asked me something doesn't mean he needs that answer right now. But I think another thing he said that was very important was that he said, it's okay that things take a while. You're not dealing with simple topics. If it takes several months to let it percolate and flow and digest and ruminate, that's okay. So I think it was important in some ways to challenge me to reflect and then say, by the way, the time you take to reflect isn't wasted time just because we haven't produced something. You're mentally going over it. So I very much see myself in that comment.
I thought about it sometimes that all these meetings are like an open-ended exam, so I need to have answers. But, just thinking about it, that the exam is not over, that you can come back and have an answer. And probably one of the comments that Professor Saeed just said, I think I responded appropriately, that we need to think and we'll talk about it later. Sharing and updating and sharing. Sharing doesn't mean that it has to be technical sharing. You can also share your feelings and your frustrations, even writing about them. But so when I say writing about your work, presenting, building a story, reflecting on that from each session, what is learned, and then see if there is a fabric that is being constructed here. I think looking at each feedback alone and not to reflect on different sessions together, or as Karim also mentioned, going to conferences or getting some feedback that puts you away, the ability to filter feedback improves, actually. So getting these stitched together helps you take the weeds or take things that you can do in the future As Mike told me once, the best dissertation is a dissertation that is done. I'm like, okay, then I don't have to save the world or, you know, explore all the dreams. They can, on the other hand, it's good to have a backlog of ideas and do them in the future and not to forget. So even this feedback that is diverging, this doesn't mean it has to be trashed. It can be stored. So probably you need a stock of these ideas that are collected over time. And explore connections. The connections, whether they are the topics that are related with each other or connections that you make with people as you share and update them. And that's why I made it every time to put this slide. And I know it was boring, but believe me, every time I did this after the presentation, somebody gave me a comment that's not related probably to the technicality of what I'm doing, but to the direction I'm heading. And I think this was very useful. Publishing. And this is, I've added, it's hard, but it's rewarding. If your committee helps you or so are supportive that you go the direction of publication, it's okay, but it's tricky, it's hard. But it kind of prepare you for the proposal, it prepares for the defense, for conferences. I think it's a very rewarding experience. And as I said before, it's an external validation and also help build relationship with the committee members if you do a publication together. That's building trust and knowing each other in terms of style. You learn about how they think, how they review papers, how you really pick on their brains doing some productive work, not like presenting and just get comments on the slides and you go. Comments on a written manuscript are totally different. They could be hard, they could be very disappointing, but I think the return over the publication or going through that process is amazing. So I'm putting this because just going through this is really helping shaping up things. And finally, I say that it's getting involved with clubs, professional society, etc. These groups are very helpful. First of all, they could provide area for getting to know who is who in the area, in the field, getting exposure to scholars or practitioners who can give you feedback. And it's also a social event that relieves the stress of going through this journey. And I think probably one of the things that was very rewarding to me is doing this, the CLM, the club, the society. This has been, I did not think about it at the beginning, but at some point, and I thought maybe it's a distraction, but I think it was very helpful. So if someone is working on their PhD and they have a time limit, this doesn't really distract. It really helps, I think. That's why I put it in a separate slide. And I share this comment that from Professor Saeed, that it's not about the outcome, the PhD or the research journey, it's about the process. And everything that helps that process is important, whether it's in the divergent part or the convergent part. They all collude together to help. If one is using or interacting with people around or with the resources available and make and the events that are scheduled along the year to use them for sharing. This shows how the process evolves. And finally, I thank you for giving me this opportunity, and I'm sharing the templates that I've used to record and reflect on my journey on SlideShare. Here is the link. And with this, I say thank you. And if you have any questions, comments.
Thank you, Raafat. We have a few minutes left. I'd like to make a pitch for the upcoming ones before we close. Oh, I cleared those on one laptop. Those are already cleared, I think, yeah. So any final comments or reflections upon the PhD journey?
You can make one after PhD.
Yeah, well, okay, Raafat, you have your challenge now. You've done the PhD journey, start getting worked on the postdoc journey.
Post-PhD journey.
The post-PhD journey model.
Oh, I guess what? I have a journal for that.
Good,
Okay,
excellent.
Yeah.
I think it was interesting because, you know, he talked about a stock, a backlog of ideas. I wondered if part of your PhD is to get the dissertation, do the process, but also fill that backlog of ideas for future work, kind of to build that up.
Actually, some of the things that, you know, you notice that I said I'm working on theory modeling in the learning sciences. That's a totally new thing for me, but I'm open to the flow. So that's, I mean, I haven't thought about any modeling, but I'm taking some of the concepts that I learned and I'm using them now. So I'm not feeling uncomfortable because, you know what? I know that this is being open to the flow or being to, you know, to put it dramatically, to support. Somebody is supporting you in that area, and that's area of expertise, and I'm learning about it. So I'm not like, okay, this is because of the funding. It can be just the source of the funding, but at the same time, need to enjoy it. And being open to the flow makes it more exciting, I guess. And I'm excited.
I think that's what makes this topic, and the reason we wanted to start our back to school is that although we're putting this in the context of system dynamics, what you're talking about here is probably true of PhDs, masters, any large-scale, long undertaking textbooks, certainly, you know, things like this. So I think it doesn't have to be just about system dynamics. This is more about the journey in a lot of ways. So we appreciate you presenting this today.
Thank you.
So we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. We are going to continue our back to school series, and the point of these sessions, like Raafat's here, is to kind of put up front the things that we all wish we had at the start of our PhD that save you hundreds of hours or lots of grief and emotional stress. This was one that was kind of soft in terms of getting us in the groove, talking about journey. The next one is going to be Professor Saeed is presenting next week about slicing complex problems. How do you take a really hard problem for a big research project or a PhD? How do you slice it to narrow it down? We'll be having Professor Radzicki present 2 times on different approaches for theory development. And then we also have Saeed is presenting the follow-up to Raafat's, which will be the actual model with the equations and behaviors. And then we're going to start getting back into our normal feedback where we're presenting sort of interim work. So the first month or 2 here is going to be a lot more, here's a back to school foundations, but we'll start sprinkling in feedback of work in progress. I have some work, Saeed has some work. Hopefully, Katra, we can see your work again. You know, get folks. Christine, please start presenting your work and you know, as you get into your classes. So it's open. We have slots in late October, and people please let myself or Christine know if you want to present. So with that, I'm going to stop the recording. Thanks everyone for attending today, and have a great week.